Welcome to the Fourth Branch program. Glad you can make it. I am MD. This program is dedicated exclusively for those with common sense, a spirit of patriotism, and a determination for a more perfect union. Stay tuned as we begin the discussion of a very important, interesting, and enlightening topic. Hope to hear from you soon. Happy listening. Ignorance is the biggest threat to any democracy. John F. Kennedy said, "The ignorance of one voter in a democracy impairs the security of us all." Hello everyone, I am MD and this is the Fourth Branch program. Today we have a very special program which is dedicated exclusively for around the midterm election. To those individuals who ask about the topics we have been discussing, which had to do with the welfare system, after the election, we will come back and continue the discussion. But for now, until November 6th, which is next Tuesday, we will dedicate our time to talk about different aspects of the elections and why it is important to be engaged this time around. Today, we will talk about the different aspects of what it means to cast a vote. Whether it's just a simple exercise of freedom, of liberty, or is there something more than that? And of course, the difficulties that some voters have been confronting, and the politics involved behind everything else that's going on. So stick around. This program today is very interesting. It is informative. It is enlightening. Stick around. We'll be right back. Join me here on the Fourth Branch at 10:30 a.m. and 6:30 p.m. every Saturday. Join me here on the Fourth Branch at 10:30 a.m. and 6:30 p.m. every Saturday. Today we wish to mention a couple of things. Number one, we encourage you to vote on November 6th. And the best way around that is if it is made possible in your state to vote early. If not, to write down that date and make certain that on November 6th, which is next Tuesday, you don't have anything planned until you vote. It is that important. But first, something that I prepared earlier, and I'd like to make it available to you, and we will later come back to have a much more open discussion on the 2018 midterm election. First, I'd like to put a case against Republicans. This program is not a political program, but this is the time that we had decided to make an exception. We cannot dance around the issue. We cannot pretend that it's not that impactful. So here it is. This is a case to vote against the Republican Party this midterm election. When the framers of the Constitution set out to craft a document which will outline the type of government to set thenceforth, they all had in the forefront of their minds a form of government not to have. You see, not too long prior, they had fled from a country which had kind of a dictator style structure. One man or woman, a king or a queen, who decided the fate of every citizen in the kingdom. His or her words were final. No one could dare to question the rationale, if any, the logic, if any, of any decision he or she made. He and he alone decided what was right, what was not right. Even the so-called advisors or confidant could lose their freedom, even their lives, if the king or the queen was either made aware of any suspicious behavior or activity of the confidant or advisor, or if the king or the queen should decide to do so. Besides, an experience our forefathers did not wish to relive, or because of such experience, they fought against the kingdom with all they had, every fiber of their being, to prevent the reestablishment of the rules of the kingdom in their newfound land. Once they succeeded, they lost no time. They didn't leave any time behind to quickly create a document to provide a framework for the new form of government under which they would like to live. A government which provides freedom, would provide the liberty to vote, the liberty to move about. After much deliberation, with little to no sleep, from one day to the next, and still they were wary of England's determination to force them to capitulation, the framers of the Constitution came up with a republic with 3 equal branches. By no means was it perfect, but it was the best that they could come up with under the circumstances. 3 branches of government. The executive branch, which would enforce the law, the legislative branch, which makes the law, and the judiciary branch, which interprets the law. The legislative branch, which comprises both houses, two houses rather, the Congress and the Senate, otherwise the arm of the government which should represent the people in the country. But it should not be any surprise to anyone that's not the case. That has not been the case for quite some time now. Neither the Congress nor the Senate do anything on behalf of the people. Nothing that they do is for the sake of the people. Of course, they tell us that's the case. Of course, they spin it around. They give us some sort of explanation in order to make us feel good. And needless to say that a number of people would believe that's the case because it benefits them. But the intention is never that. Now, although both major political parties bear most of the blame, the past 8 years, however, during which the Republican Party has been in complete control of both houses, we have been in the worst periods in the history of the Republic. Now, members of the media have been shy to place the blame squarely on the Republican Party. But for at least the past 8 years, they should have. However, any sound-minded individual, irrespective of political affiliation, should not have any difficulty to come up to the inevitable conclusion that members of the Republican Party, no exception, have relinquished the duty for which they were elected. They have abandoned the people who elected them. They have thrown away any principle they claim to hold. And they have made a mockery of our democracy in America. As if that's not enough, they have literally given the finger to the American constituent. Yes, that's including the Republican constituent. Although time will not allow us to list every item in the repertoire of blame to put on the Republican Party for the past 8 years, let's outline just a few. On February 2017, just a month into Donald Trump's presidency, the Republican Party, without any input, discussion, or debate, passed a $1.5 trillion tax cut. Yes, it was a tax cut for a large corporation and wealthy individual, but it was a tax bill for that amount or even a greater amount to we, the people. And the irony of the whole thing is they not only have deceived the American people by promoting the tax cut to the large corporation and wealthy individual as a tax cut for the people, but 60% of the people in the country oppose that legislation. You know, in a democracy, legislation ought to pass the minimum threshold to satisfy the majority. Well, Republicans bypass the will of the majority. It just doesn't matter, as I mentioned earlier, because they're not there to serve the will of the people. They pretend to do so, but that's not the case. On October 2018, we're talking about just past month, the Republican Party, despite opposition by 62% of the population, confirmed Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court. You know, in a democracy, a majority is needed to move a process forward. To the Republicans, it just doesn't matter. Republicans bypass the will of the majority. 62 times under the Obama administration. And already twice under the Trump administration, Republicans had attempted to get rid of Healthcare Act, aka Obamacare, despite the overwhelming evidence that the majority in the country support the Healthcare Act. And on top of that, 20 plus million individuals are covered under the act. But Republicans want to get rid of it. Surely this is not something they are doing for the sake of the people. Because however stupid an individual would be, if you have a healthcare act or any piece of legislation that 62% of the people in the country support and approve, and on top of that you have 20 plus million people who are covered under that act, how could any legislator justify trying to get rid of that? The Republicans had failed the majority over and over and over again. And they had failed the majority every single time. Just recently, Mitch McConnell, who is the Senate Majority Leader, in an interview according to Bloomberg, he promised that he will try again to kill the Healthcare Act if the Republicans keep the House. Republicans have proven over and over and over and beyond any shred of a doubt, they're not in Washington to represent the will of the people. What are they there for? If the idea, even the interview Mitch McConnell gave to Bloomberg that says that we will try to kill Obamacare once again if we keep the House, it has to boggle the mind. Not only the majority of the people in the nation want it, support it, approve it, 20 plus million people are covered under the act. And yet, Mitch McConnell, not something that I speculate about, but Mitch McConnell said if the Republicans keep the House, they will try once again to kill Obamacare. Now, you don't have to be a genius to see the problem here. Republicans are not in Washington to do the will of the people, because in a republic, the legislators, the representative, would do what's good by the majority, by the people. But Republicans are determined to do just the opposite. So the $1 million question, this is a big question. Why would any sound-minded individual keep rewarding those who are not doing the job for which they were hired? Here it is again. Why would any sound-minded individual continue to reward those who are not doing the job for which they were elected? The answer when we come back. Join me here on the Fourth Branch at 10:30 a.m. and 6:30 p.m. every Saturday.
In 1996, a small network by the name of Fox News was launched with just 17 million viewers. Today, with over 100 million people watching regularly, Fox has become the greatest threat to our democracy, constantly bombarding the airwaves with false information, distortion of facts, and outright lies, presenting to its audience as news. Fox has created an army of blissful ignorance. According to a recent survey, 82% of Fox viewers are ignorant of facts and the truth. To keep millions of people in ignorance not only prevents democracy from flourishing, but it also clears the path to authoritarianism, to dictatorship. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." Let me finish by saying that democracy cannot survive in an environment where truth and facts do not matter. At Fox, truth and facts do not matter. Indeed, democracy in America is in jeopardy. It is a crisis the country can no longer ignore.
November 6th, which is next Tuesday, this is the midterm election. A couple of things before we get back to the discussion at hand. One, it is imperative to vote this midterm election. I am personally guilty of ignoring midterm election because I never see the importance of doing so until this time around. Vote as if your lives depend on it, because, it does. But there is also something else you should pay close attention to. Not just to go and vote, but to pay attention to whom you're voting for. And I say that because there has been plenty of irregularities this time around in terms of election. Ironically, those in the Republican Party who always claim to be patriots are very aggressively looking to prevent individuals from different groups from ever reaching the ballot. Ironic, isn't it? Patriot, but actions are completely contrarian to what a patriot would do. Now, of course, their actions are covered under the banner of voters fraud. Now, this is a debate that has been in this country for as long as we can remember. And for 20 years, there's been a study done that's dated since 1978. There has been no proof, no evidence whatsoever here in the United States of America of voters fraud. And yet, every attempt, and noted that it's done exclusively by Republicans. Yes, you heard correctly. Republicans have always been at the forefront of trying to prevent, trying to deceive, trying to eliminate. They have what you would call a Machiavellian strategy. First, they try to prevent people from voting. They try to put stumbling block. They put difficulty in the process so that group of people do not vote. And if none of that seems to work, now they come and try to remove people from the voting list. And when that's also revealed and noise is made, now at the very end, they try to make sure that the vote do not count. Today, we have a couple of examples. The one that I will actually give you two examples. One that's happening in Texas and one that's happening in Georgia. In Georgia, the Secretary of State, who is responsible for voting, the integrity of voting, of the voting system, has been aggressively removing blocks of people from the voting list. In fact, for the past 3 years, no joke, no kidding, you can Google it, you can find plenty of article written to that effect, that for the past 3 years alone, Brian Kemp, that's the name, the Secretary of State for the state of Georgia, Brian Kemp has removed almost 500,000 individuals from the list. This is not a small number. 500,000 individuals were removed from the list. Now, this year alone, 53,000 have been removed from the list. But now, this is the job of the Secretary of State for any particular state, of course, is to ensure the integrity of the process. That's fine. Nobody is arguing it. But there is one problem this time around. Brian Kemp bid for the office of governorship in the state of Georgia. One, he refused to relinquish his duty as the individual who is responsible for the integrity of the voting process. See the problem? There is a conflict there. He wants to become governor. He is responsible for voting integrity, and he refused to excuse himself, to recuse himself from that aspect of the job. But what's worse is the fact that the 53,000 people this year alone whose name have been removed from the voting list, 30,000 of them belong to the minority group, blacks, Hispanics. Drum roll, the individual who is also vying for the office of governorship happened to be a black woman. Now, they can spin it 1,000 ways. And that's what, for some reason, the Republican patriot always have a way of explaining away the kind of thing that they do that actually trigger a lack of trust in the process. Think about having the individual who is vying for the office of governorship, who is now responsible, is also responsible for vote count. Now, you don't have to be a genius to figure out that, oh, gee, that guy should have recused himself. There is no reason for anybody to mention it. But here's what triggered the flag is the fact that those 53,000 people whose name were removed from the voting list were not even aware of that fact. And here's how it came about. It is a professor that was that was teaching her student about the process of voting, and she was using her name to show the whole process. That's when she found out that her name was not on the list. And mind you, that person has been actively voting. In other words, she has not missed a single opportunity to vote. But drum roll, she is Hispanic. You see the problem? So Republicans have been at the root of undermining the system of democracy in the country. Now, if you are a Republican and you think it's okay, you too are part of the problem. Because whenever there is a problem in a system of democracy, it doesn't just impact one individual. Yes, you may benefit of the outcome today. But beyond today, there is your kids, your grandkids, your great-grandkids. Beyond today, there is the next generation who's going to have to cope with the problem that you either supported or you left behind or you didn't care to address. Or you didn't care because it helps you, it helps your party, so why should you care? Unfortunately, anything that happened in a system of democracy, everybody will suffer. There is only one boat called the United States of America. And that boat, your kids, your grandkids, your great-grandkids, and beyond will be on that boat. So if you don't care to destroy it, then you are also part of the problem, contributing to make life much more difficult for future generations. So it's not just a matter of when we talk about, and those things are not a discussion about Democrat versus Republican, it's a discussion about inappropriate things to do in a democracy. So yes, it's good to tell people to vote. There is nothing wrong to try to keep an eye out so that we don't have a system that's undermined by the mistake that are made. But we know, because it's something that has been going on for a very long time here in the United States, the Republican Party exclusively have been at the root of preventing people from exercising the right to vote. It has been a while. It's been going on in the country. First, they were very pro-slaves. They want slaves to be kept in the system. After slavery has been abolished, Republicans have tried. By the way, it used to be the Democrat Party, but turned Republican later on. In other words, the Democrats have evolved and become a party for the people, a party that understands that those values have to be preserved, and Republicans are going backwards. Oh, amazing, isn't it? So Brian Kemp, that's problem number one that we have in Georgia. Now, we just found out just a couple of days ago that in Texas, for the people that were involved in doing early voting, and again, those are not information that I pull out of a hat, information that are currently being written about by reporters on the ground, that early voting prove that when people go to the poll, they select individuals on the machine, and at the end, when it comes time and they say to review your selection, they found that their vote changed from one candidate to the next. And in that particular case, it was from Beto O'Rourke to Ted Cruz. Yes, they even have pictures of the scene that are currently happening in Texas, where the individual go to the poll, go to the machine and make the selections. And if that individual didn't bother to check at the end before clicking the last option to submit, that individual who intended to vote for Beto O'Rourke, his or her vote would have gone to Ted Cruz, because the machine automatically changed the vote from what it was now to, which means from a Democrat to a Republican. Talk about voters fraud. So when you go to the poll, I urge you, before you make you press the enter key that submit everything that you have done, make certain that you double check that the individual for whom you voted is the individual that checked. Because it is revealed in Texas, at least for now, that's the only state at this point that there is proof that's going on. But be careful anyway, so that when you make your selection, that selection is not switched to somebody else. Because it's one thing that you go to the poll to vote, but it's a completely different thing that you find out that your vote went to somebody else. Now, the reason that I mentioned it is imperative to vote is because your life depends on it. For 8 years, the Republicans have been in full control of both houses. Now, you don't have to be a genius to see what is currently going on in the country. And no matter how much you may benefit of some of the things that they have done, which I'm sure you have. And in case it may sound like what's being done is good for the country, I ought to remind you the United States is supposed to be a democratic system, a democratic government. In other words, things that are done in the country are supposed at least to meet the minimum threshold to go with the majority. That's what really differentiates a system, a democratic system, from any of the other system of government. Because the majority is, the voice of the majority is what prevails. Now, if that doesn't happen, we can no longer talk about the United States as being a democratic system. And we have had a taste that for the past 8 years, or at the very least for the past two years, it has been a completely different country. Republicans done everything that they wish to do despite the opposition of the majority in the country. They have done, and yet what they have done impact the whole country. That's why in a democratic system, it is imperative that those in government listen to the voice of the majority, because whatever action that they do, legislation that they pass, laws, will impact the whole country, will affect the whole country. So you cannot go with a minority. The tax cut that they gave to the wealthy and to the large corporation happen to impact us, we the people, because guess who gets the bill? And that's the conversation we were having when we were talking about the welfare system, which, again, as I mentioned earlier, we will come back to after the election. It's because when the representative that you send to Washington to represent the view of the majority decide to do otherwise, yes, some people will benefit of their action. There are always going to be that. For God's sake, Adolf Hitler had people who benefit of what he was doing. So did Saddam Hussein. No matter who is doing what, there are always going to be people who benefit of what they do. But that doesn't make it right. Because the whole point of having a democratic system is to give voice to the majority. Once the majority stops, when the majority doesn't matter anymore, you can no longer talk about a system of democracy anymore. And today, with the Republican in the majority, that's what we have in the country. The voice of the majority no longer matters. They pass a tax cut, a majority oppose it. They put Brett Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court, a majority oppose it. They've been trying to kill Obamacare, a majority wants it. So once you have members in the government that do not listen to the voice of the majority any longer, then you cannot talk about a system of democracy anymore. That's why this election, this midterm election, we ought to change that, because to vote for Republican is to continue to accept that a system, a non-democratic system, is okay. That's all it means, which means you become part of the problem. You become part of the individual who create the problem. By the way, before Adolf Hitler became the monster that he did become, he had the support of the Reichstag and the Reichsrat. That's the equivalent of Congress and the Senate here in the United States. They, members of the Reichstag and the Reichsrat, they too were supportive of what Adolf Hitler was trying to achieve. They lended their support. That doesn't mean it was good. In fact, we know it wasn't good because we know what the outcome was. So just because you have members of Congress and the Senate, both Republicans, are doing things that please a group of people, that does not translate to being good for the country. Now, the gauge to figure out what's good for the country is what I mentioned earlier. The voice of the majority must matter. Once you get to the point of saying that the voice of the majority doesn't matter anymore, then we know we're no longer in a democratic system. No matter what people tell you, we're not talking about a democratic system. With Hitler, it went really slowly, gradually, getting the approval of the Reichstag and the Reichsrat, and eventually sidelined by Adolf Hitler, by the Chancellor office, and at that point, they no longer matter. By the time that they realized what was going on, it was too late. But Adolf Hitler made use of the Reichstag and the Reichsrat in order to achieve his Machiavellian agenda. So it is imperative to vote on November 6th, next Tuesday. But it is also extremely important to make certain that your vote does not go to any Republican, because the Republicans are responsible for the predicament we're in today. Yes, the Republican legislators are fully and solely responsible for the predicament we are today. They have been in full control of both houses since 2010. They have been in control. And for the past 2 years, everything that they have done, they receive no input from Democrat. They listen to nobody. They just going along and passing legislations. But what's worse is because their action impacts we the people. Yes, their action impacts us, because the tax bill, the $1.5 trillion tax bill that we have now, has to be paid somehow. That's why you're hearing Mitch McConnell saying that he's going to try to cut Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and any welfare program. Again, I invite you after the election for the continuation of that conversation, because it is important. Whatever the government is doing is not without consequences. So the Republicans have done, for the past 2 years alone, passed a number of legislation that impact us greatly. That tax cut that went to the large corporation and wealthy individual, we're going to pay for it for generations to come. And yet, not only we, the people, opposed it, but on top of that, Republican legislators deceived us, because they promoted that tax cut as being a tax cut for the people. And we know that's not the case. So you cannot sit at home on November 6th. That's the first course of action you need to take. You need to go to the poll. There is no if and but about it. You need to go to the poll. And second, when you go to the poll, you need to make certain that your vote does not go to someone you didn't intend it to go to. It is that important. November 6, 2018, that's next Tuesday. That's the midterm election. One, you need to go to the poll to vote. If you did not participate in early voting, this is a date you must remember. But don't just go to the poll to vote. Make certain when you go, your eyes are wide open, you pay attention to what you're doing, because there are instances already that show that individual tried to vote for a certain candidate, that vote was switched to another candidate. That happened in Texas, but it can happen elsewhere. So make certain that you pay close attention to that. And third, and that's the most important thing, if you wish to preserve the democratic system, the freedom that we have enjoyed here in the United States, it is imperative that you vote your Republican legislator out of office. It's not an if and a but, it is imperative. Republican legislators have been in control of the houses since 2010. Look at the state of the country and ask yourself the question, would you want this country to continue to be the way it is today? I certainly don't. So remember, it is imperative that you vote. It is extremely critical that you vote your Republican legislator out of office. If we wish to correct the problem that we have in the United States of America today, we need to vote Republicans out of office. That's the only possible solution. We already know they're not going to fix the problem. We already know that. They have been in control since 2010. And no matter what they say, we know it is just pure politics. We will be right back. Join me here on the fourth branch at 10:30 a.m. and 6:30 p.m. every Saturday. I do thank you for spending the time with me, and hope that you had some relevant, important information that can help you make the best out of the midterm election. Once again, although in this program we try to stay not to try to sway people one way or the other, but we had to make an exception because it is that important. We have been living in a country where Republicans have been in control since 2010, and we've seen where we are. You would not hire someone to do a job and the person cannot or will not do the job, and you will continue to pay that individual for the same job. So for that reason, if you hire a contractor to do a job and the contractor cannot do the job, you get rid of the contractor and get another one. That's as simple as that. Thus far, Republicans cannot or will not do the job, so it's time to get rid of the Republican in Washington and vote for the Democrats. At least give another contractor a chance, an opportunity to prove either they can or they cannot. But at this point, these contractors that we have in Washington, those Republican contractors, have proven beyond a reasonable doubt that they're incapable of doing the job or they're not willing to do the job. Whichever that is, our lives are too important to put it in the hands of those who do not care a bit about our best interests. So we hope to see you again tomorrow, in which during time we will continue this conversation as to what are the stakes of not voting on November 6th and what to look for when you go to the voting booth. Once again, thank you for watching. I hope to see you again next time. Good day. The Fourth Branch Podcast is brought to you in collaboration with the People Branch publication, which can be found on the People Branch website, located at peoplebranch.org. That's peoplebranch.org. That's peoplebranch.org website, in which you will find a number of very interesting articles. My name is Mike Duchesne, MD for short. I hope you have a great afternoon or a great evening, whichever it happens to be. Hopefully you can join me again next time for another interesting episode of this podcast. That was the Fourth Branch, live from New York. Good day.